So for this question, ZSE Co. Guys, just want to remind you that this question, as I have been constantly saying, I think I mentioned this when I did working capital, if I'm not mistaken, I mentioned this before, and then now I'm mentioning it again. ZSE Co is a slightly different question. Examiner has been asking these kind of questions again, as in more frequently, he has been doing it. Examiner also thinks that a question like this, students find it difficult to do and students don't understand the concept. Okay, just to remind you, this concept follows the concept of probability analysis. So when you talk about probability analysis, the difference between this question and a question that we have done before is that in a question like this, what happens is that you will notice that one of the year cash flow will happen after the other. Normally, all your other questions, your cash flows are independent from each other. So in this scenario, when your cash flow depends on one another, what you have to do or what do you need to know is that this particular question, there will be one cash flow occurring after the other. And when there is one cash flow occurring after the other, this actually is a joint probability type question. Okay. Why? Okay, I will explain it to you while we are doing this question. Let's read it first. And then later, I will explain while we do the answer, because if there is no figures, it might be a little bit more difficult for you to understand. But when I put figures to it, it might be a little bit more understandable. Okay. Now, so required, calculate the following values. So number one, the expected value of period one closing balance. Okay. So expected value only for period one. Okay. And then expected value for period two closing balance, probability of negative cash flow at the end of period two, the probability of exceeding overdraft limit at the end of period two, and you need to discuss whether the above analysis can assist a company in managing its cash flow. So this one, he's asking whether probability analysis can be used in managing the company's cash flow. Now, let's read the body of the question. Now, ZSE is concerned about exceeding the overdraft limit of 2 million in the next two periods. It has been experiencing considerable volatility in your cash flows in the recent period because of trading difficulties experienced by its customers, who have often settled their accounts after the agreed period of 60 days. ZSE has also experienced an increase in bad debts due to small number of customers going into liquidation. The company has prepared the following forecast of net cash flow for the next two periods, together with their associated probabilities, in an attempt to anticipate liquidity and financing problems. These probabilities have been produced by a computer model which simulates a number of possible future economic scenarios. The computer model has been built with the aid of the firm of a financial consultant. Now, your period one cash flows, probability, period two cash flows, probability. Now, ZSE expects to be overdrawn at the start of the period by $500,000. Okay. So let's start to do this question. It's actually quite straightforward. The only concept that you need to understand is the concept of expected values, okay, and how you use the concept of expected value. Now, So let me share my screen first, okay? I'm going to do it in Excel. Um, okay, is that as equal? Okay. Um, okay, so part A is asking you to calculate expected value of the period one closing balance. Now guys, so assuming you want to find the closing balance of period one, how do we deal or how do we go about it? So I just want you to remember that in a question like this, what is important for you to do is you first need to understand the concept of this question. How does it works? How does it work? What is happening? What do you need to do and how do you do it? So for this particular question, you can see that there are cash flows that are occurring at the end of the period and at the beginning of the period. So in order for you to calculate the expected value of period one closing balance is actually very, very simple. Okay, now, so you can see that, maybe let me share my Word document for a while. Okay, so you can see that period one cash flow, okay, your probability is 10, 60, and 30. So guys, I just want to remind you that period one cash flow, the probability and calculating the expected value is exactly the same. The only problem is that he asks you for closing balance. Now, the concept of closing balance is you need to take opening balance plus cash flow during the year you will get closing balance. Okay, so that's the concept. That's what you're supposed to do. Now, here, the opening balance he's given you is overdrawn negative 500. So what you need to do is to find closing balance of your cash flow. What you do is you take your period one cash flow, you add it to your opening balance, you get closing balance, and subsequently, after that, what you do is you find the expected value by multiplying it with the probability. So let me show you how to do this. Okay, so A part 1, expected value of, so year. Okay. Before I do this, maybe we should do this. Okay, opening balance plus period one cash flow equals to closing balance. You multiply by probability, you get expected value. So here is negative 500, the three multiple types of outcome. And then the period one cash flow, okay guys, you need to go back to your question and look at this, which is 8,000, 4,000, and 2,000. Okay, 8,000, 4,000, and negative 2,000. 8,000, 4,000, negative 2,000. My probability here will be 0 0.1, 0 0.6, 0 0.1, 0 0.6, 0 0.3. Okay, now, so to find closing balance is simple. You just need to sum your opening balance and your cash flow during the year. And then subsequent to that, you need to find your expected value. So your expected value equals to closing balance multiplied by probability, and you total them up. This would be your expected value of your period 1 closing balance. All right. Now, the expected value, so you just need to write here. Please remember to indicate that this is expected value. Okay. Now, the next one. Question number 2. He asked you for expected value of period 2 cash flows. Okay, this one, guys, you need to be a bit more careful because the closing balance of period 1 plus the period 2 cash flow, because closing balance of period 1 is opening balance for period 2. So what you do is you can call it either opening balance of period 1 or you can also call it closing balance of period 2. Okay, what you do with that is you add it to your period 2 cash flows. But now you need to be a bit more careful. Why? Because you don't use probability anymore. You will end up using joint probability. Why do you use joint probability? What is the logic of using joint probability? The logic of using joint probability is that year 2 cash flow will occur after year 1. Okay, year 2 cash flow will occur after year 1. Now, because year 2 cash flows occurs after year 1, what is important for you to do is, it means that the probability of these cash flows occurring will have a combination of year 1 probability and also year 2 probability. So that will be a joint probability because 2 years of cash flows are occurring together, okay, simultaneously or concurrently. So how do I do this, guys? This is a little bit different. Now, let me go back to the question. So from here you can see that the year 1 cash flow, okay, if the cash flow in year 1 is 8,000, okay, then the probability is 10%. So if the year 1 cash flow, so how it will look like is this. Let me just draw you so year 1 cash flow, so 8,000. Now this one cash flow, if the cash flow in year 1 is 8,000, the cash flow in year 2 can be 7,000, 3,000, and 9,000. All right. If the cash flow in year 1 is 4,000, then it can be in year 2 7,000, 9,000, and 7,000, 3,000, and 9,000. 9,000 is negative. Okay, so you need to just be careful or be aware of it. That means every possible scenario, the outcome will be 739. Why? Because you are looking at it in this perspective. If my cash flow in year 1 is 8,000, if my cash flow in year 1 is 4,000, and if my cash flow in year 1 is negative 4,000. Okay, so these are the concepts that you are holding on to. Now, after this, okay, then you will multiply by your joint probability, but you need to first find your closing balance. Okay, so let me show you how you do it. What is important, guys, is for you to understand the concept where you have each cash flow, you have a 3 options. That means year 1, Closing balance, you have three options. Okay. Now, let's try to do this together. Don't worry, I will re-explain as we go. So, period 1 closing balance plus period 2 cash flow is closing balance. You multiply by joint probabilities, you should get expected value. So, my period 1 closing balance 7,500. My period 2 cash flow would be 7, 3, and negative 9. 7,000, 3,000, negative 9,000. Okay, so this is the closing balance. Okay, now guys, um, joint probability, how do you get it? You will take your probability of your year 1 cash flows, which is the 10%, and you multiply by, for 7,000, 30%, for 3,000, 50%, and for 9,000 is 20%. So here equals to 0 0.1, oops, 0 0.1, multiply 0 0.3, and then 0 0.1 multiply 0 0.5, and 0 0.1 multiply 0 0.2. Okay. Now, the next cash flow that you have would be, okay, you go up here, you see the next opening balance would be 3,500. So 3,500. So I'll just copy and paste it. Now guys, since you already copy and paste all this, you can just copy and paste. It will auto populate for you. The joint probability is 60%. So 0 0.6 multiplied by 30%. 0 0.6 multiply 0 0.3, and 0 0.6 multiply 0 0.2. So 0 0.3, 0 0.2 is 0 0.5, and then 0 0.2. Then the last possible cash flow is 2,500 negative. Okay. Okay, so I just copy, paste. So guys, you see life becomes so easy with CBE. Actually, it's just a common misperception that CBE makes life. Actually, CBE makes your life a whole lot easier, to be very, very frank and honest with you. Okay, now here equals to 0 0.3 multiply 0 0.3, and then 0 0.3 multiply 0 0.5, and 0 0.3 multiply 0 0.2. Okay, now you can find your expected value. Okay, and your total expected value. Okay, now from here, you can see that the total expected value for your year 2 closing balance is actually $3,900. Okay, $3,900. So it's a positive expected value, which is good. Okay. So this is expected value. Value. Okay, now guys, the next one, your examiner asked you what is the probability of a negative cash balance. So what you need to find is look at all your negative cash flows okay, negative cash flows, and from the negative cash flow, you add up the probability elements. So I'm just going to do it in a different color. So here my negative cash flow is 1, 2. You can see there my negative cash flow here is 1005. And here, so this is part 3. Probability, oh my god, probability of negative cash flows is, okay, I remember the first value, okay, 0 0.02, 0 0.12, and 0 0.06. Okay, so 0 0.20, okay. Now 0 0.20 also equals to 20%. All right. Now the last question, your examiner's last question. Okay, you are required to calculate the probability of exceeding the overdraft limit. So your overdraft limit is actually negative 2000. Now, what you need to do is you need to calculate what is the value, the probability, attached to the value, the negative value. So look at your question. Here, the probability, guys, I'm going to highlight beside it because if not, then it will get confusing. No, I'll use a different color. Okay, so this one, it exceeds the overdraft limit. Overdraft limit is negative 2000. Negative 550 also exceeds the overdraft limit. That's all. Okay, so the probability of exceeding the limit is 0.18, okay, or 18%. Okay, so now the moment your examiner asks you the probability of exceeding a certain limit or whatever it is, right? You must calculate for him the probability values. Okay, guys, so please be careful. Please be aware of what you are doing. Now, just to recap the whole thing, the first concept that you need to hold on to is the concept of calculating your closing balance. Okay, to calculate closing balance, you must take opening balance plus current year cash flow. You will get closing balance. Now, if he asks you to find the probability of the year 1 closing balance, what you do is you find the year 1 closing balance, you multiply by the probability of cash flows in year 1, you will get the expected value of year 1. All right, so that one is actually quite easy. It's simple. It's something that you have done before. It's something that you are aware of. You know what's happening. Okay, but the next one is the one that is a little bit confusing because it is something new. As you know, your examiner loves to test you one new thing every semester, at least minimum. All right, so what he tested you here was he asked you to calculate what is the expected value of the period 2 closing balance. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing, guys. Why? Because the expected value for period 2 closing balance, in order for you to do that, you first need what is the closing balance for period 2. So how do you do that? To find the period 2 closing balance, you first need to take the period 1 closing balance plus the period 2 cash flow movement, and then you will be able to find the period 2 closing balance. So the concept remains the same. So how is it different? Okay, the difference is your period 1 closing balance, all right, for each value or for each period 1 closing balance, there is a possibility of 3 cash flows in year 2. All right, so if the period 1 closing balance is 7,500, you have 3 outcomes. It's similar like what they did in year 1, guys. Okay, so you know what happened in year 1? He gave you only the opening balance is negative 500. But for negative 500, you plus 8,000, plus 4,000, and plus 2,000. Right? He gave you only 1, but you add up to all 3. So the same concept. Your opening balance for period 2 plus the cash flows, you will get the closing balance in period 2. All right. Then, because 1 year cash flow is occurring after the other, for this to happen, there is a probability. For this to happen, there is a probability. So 2 years of cash flows occurring together will give you the result of joint probability. That means 1 year cash flow occurring and after another, you need to use the concept of joint probability. Then subsequently, after you have done that, you calculate your expected value. When you total everything up, so remember, to calculate the expected value, you will take the closing balance multiplied by joint probability. You will get expected value. You total up all these expected values, you will get period 2 expected value. And whenever he asks you a probability, you must ensure that the probability is calculated by adding each of these elements. Okay, so hopefully this is clear. There is another question that you guys can try. I think it's a June 2014 question called Flitco. I'm not too sure about the year. Yeah, you guys can try it. The concept is similar. Of course, there's a little bit of differences, but the concept is similar. Conceptually, it's the same thing. Now, recently also your examiner has tested another variation of this question using NPV. So you guys can try that also. If you have any questions, you can always go back to your own lecturers. I'm sure they would be able to, I'm sure they will be happy to help you, okay? But please try these questions. I cannot remember the more recent one, but these are vital questions. These are the kind of questions that your examiner tests to purposely make a student fail, okay? So please make sure you cover all your bases, and the next topic that I'm going to do will be chapter 11.